So my girlfriend shares an apartment with two of her close friends who are a couple. They live in a 2-story house with their apartment being downstairs and one other apartment upstairs. Keep this in mind. A couple of months ago, the upstairs apartment became vacant, and some time went by when one of her roommates talked to their landlord about renting the upstairs apartment to my girlfriend. That way they all essentially would have the house to themselves. The landlord explained that someone was already paying rent in that apartment for the past 2 months. Which was strange because no one has been seen moving in at all in that time frame. A couple of months go by, and still no one has moved in. However, footsteps were occasionally heard moving about upstairs, and they sound like consistent heavy footsteps of a person. Yet no one has ever seen anyone coming up or down, in or out of the house from the upstairs apartment, or even another car in the driveway aside from the people's vehicles living there already. This is a detail that I noticed, and one of her roommates brought it up one time as well. Even my girl's dog has barked at the noises upstairs from time to time. Speaking of the dog, I have actually walked her around the property of the house myself, and there is absolutely no other entrance to the house but the front door, unless someone is climbing in through the upstairs window every time, which I highly doubt. About a month ago, the male roommate went upstairs to knock on the door out of curiosity after hearing the footsteps walking around again one afternoon. Surely if someone is living in the same house, it would be courtesy to meet them and introduce yourself, so he went to do just that. What he noticed on the door was what appeared to be a wreath made of sticks with flowers spread out on it, with a sign in the middle space between saying, "Do not remove." Despite thinking it was weird, he knocked twice with no one answering, but heard the same walking around noise once he got back to his apartment. Aside from the occasional footsteps, nothing really bothered them, so my girl and her roommates left it alone, until 2 weeks ago, when they heard what sounded like running around in the upstairs apartment and thumps as if someone was falling on the floor. This freaked them out enough to call the landlord, which in turn called the police and arrived shortly before them. The landlord let the police into the apartment, but found nothing in there. As in nothing. Like no one had even fucking been living there at all. The only item in the apartment aside from the wreath on the door was a bronze jar-like item in one of the closets of a bedroom. 2 days later, the female roommate came into the house at the same time that a random woman with dark hair, fairly attractive with a long brown coat, holding the wreath in one hand and the aforementioned bronze jar in the other, walked down the stairs from the apartment. The woman made zero eye contact with the roommate and had a very serious look on her face, crossed the street without looking in either direction, and got into a black car driving away, never to be seen again. My girl and her roommates have never heard the sounds of footsteps since. My question is, does anyone have any explanation or theories for what these events were? We have had trouble adding them up and are completely dumbfounded, to say the least. It was a pretty uneventful day. We had just finished settling in our new home and out of the dreadful condo units we occupied while this house was under construction. Everyone else had plans while I agreed to stay behind with my grandma to finish with the decoration details around the house. When grandma's at home, you can expect a clean, fresh-smelling home, and she will turn off all unnecessary lights around the house to conserve electricity. It was 11:30 in the morning when she called me down to eat. I was upstairs folding my clothes from our luggage. I went down and she was just taking the food out of the oven and told me, "Oh good, I was just about to call you." It was weird cause I solemnly swear I heard her just call me when I was upstairs. I dismissed it thinking she just forgot. We were eating and talking about plans for the rest of the day. To give you a visual, our dining table was rectangular, with the less wide side facing the narrow staircase that would lead to the bedrooms. That was when we heard it. A few thuds. What we guessed was from the upstairs landing. Then the sound progressed to what sounded like footsteps that was going down the stairs and became louder as it steps closer downstairs. Then after the last step on the stairs, it stopped. We both looked at each other with wide eyes, and we were both panting, and it was apparent that my grandma was scared too. She took a huge breath, and with trembling fingers, she flipped the switch to open all the downstairs lights and turned the TV on for some background noise. It was 11 in the freaking morning on a newly constructed house. We were so scared that we just ate in silence and just sat in the living room for what seemed an eternity until every one of our family came home. They asked us about our day, and somehow we both knew in silent agreement that we should keep to ourselves what happened earlier. Later that night around 9, everyone was in bed, and as always I share a room with my grandma, and my aunt who was visiting us was in the same room as well. Everything was quiet, and we had a lamp on. My eyes were closed, but I felt a shift in the mattress and the lamplight went out. I assumed it was my grandma that decided to conserve electricity again. I shrugged it off and tried to fall asleep. I heard one of our family members went down the stairs and was going on about the kitchen and, I guess, eating, because we can hear the clatter of spoon and forks against the plate and the faucet turning on as well. Mind you, we don't have neighbors yet, as the subdivision was still in early development. I fell fast asleep after that. In the morning there was a slight commotion when I got to breakfast. Everyone was teasing my aunt, the one that slept next to me, saying that she got hungry again and went downstairs in the night rummaging for leftovers. My grandma was unaware of this, as she brought my cousin Anna to school earlier this morning and hasn't been home yet. Everyone saw me walk down the stairs, and when I caught up to their conversation, I blankly told them, no, Aunt Andy was beside me in bed the whole night. I thought it was one of you guys that went down. I was still just half asleep when I heard someone eating too. Everyone got silent as I finished my sentence, and from there we all knew that it was never one of you whose noise we heard last night. Ever since that event, we have had our own share of stories that made the chills run down our spines. I have a story that happened just a couple days ago, Jan 20th, about 2-3 am-ish. I just want to write it to see if anyone's seen anything similar. So me and my boyfriend went to park at a parking lot right by a church. We were in his Jeep facing the church, and he was telling me his past life story, and I was listening to him talk because it was something heavy that was on his chest that he felt he needed to let out to me. So he works night shift and was on a break, so he gets a call to go back to work at 3, so we are pulling out of the parking lot and we notice 3 deer, and there was an alleyway that went towards the direction to where you can get a good glance at them. My boyfriend asked me if we should pull in to see these deer, so I said yes, and we did, and parked there for a minute staring at these deer, and 2 of them were male and the one was female but kept walking while the other 2 male deer stopped and stared. We just looked at them and was like, cool, and then we backed out with the headlights facing towards the 3rd deer standing there. We stopped and my boyfriend stared at it and said, that's an ugly, weird-looking deer. And I looked, and it did not look normal at all. It stared back at us, but this stare looked so eerie. This deer had a white face from the bottom to its eyes, and its nose was pushed downwards like a flat face. The eyes were facing directly straight to us and not sideways as a normal deer would have. The body was that of a deer, and my boyfriend continued to stare and examine the deer, and I was questioning, like, is that a deer or a different animal? And he's like, no, that's a deer. I stared at it and I told my boyfriend, why are we staring at it? And I looked away because I didn't want to stare at it anymore. And I told him to go and we left, and I was like, that deer did not look normal. And he was like, you seen that too, right? And I had the chills all the way back home. He told me to not tell anyone what we saw and tried to convince me that we only seen 2 male deer and not the 3rd one, to help me feel not as scared considering I was going home alone. I got home safe and went right to sleep. The next morning, me and my boyfriend talked about it and agreed what we both saw, and then stopped talking about it because I can still see how it looked in my mind. But that's my story. It just been so on my mind because I never seen anything like that in my life. We are next to a reservation where we were, and not sure if this is relevant, but maybe 30 minutes before we left there was coyotes in the field whining, and we rolled down our windows to listen to them and they stopped, so we continued talking.